Thank you for being courteous and spending a few minutes on this important issue. I'm likely not telling you anything you don't already know, but CBS News analysis of Department of Labor and FAA data show we're about 30 to 32,000 short in workers in aviation. What's your office doing to address that issue?
Well, we need to build a new generation of aviation workers. We see retirements, we see attrition at the same time that we see demand going up. We know that there's going to be more demand than ever for aviation workers. As a matter of fact, we just had the largest number of passengers ever recorded. So for our part, some of the things that we're doing include actions to increase staffing within the FAA, which is an important part of the aviation sector, but also funding support for people to see themselves in careers in aviation. And this is a time when we can't leave any talent on the table. A lot of Americans have been underrepresented in aviation in the past. We got to make sure that every kind of American who might be disposed to thrive in an aviation career sees that they could have a future, whether it's as a pilot, an air traffic controller, a mechanic, which is a very sought after and well-paying job that I think is only going to grow, or many other roles that are integral to the future of U.S. aviation.
It's interesting you say that. I was talking to a mechanic student, a lady from Puerto Rico, who, right, we see a lot of white men. That's the bottom line. That's what Labor Department data shows. And she was saying, I also talking to a young black lady who's at a high school, wants to be a pilot. Is the Department of Transportation doing enough? Is the federal government doing enough to attract those students? Maybe offering more scholarships, more money in order to attract people to this industry, which heretofore has been dominated by white men.
This is exactly why we have been reaching out to encourage K through 12 STEM programming, things like that really build up people, including women and students of color who might not have a multi-generational tradition of being in this field. Let's also be clear that industry needs to have the kind of competitive pay and active recruiting to fill their jobs. Most of the jobs we're talking about are in the private sector. But we're also working to make sure that we're drawing more people into the public sector when it comes to those jobs in technical operations and air traffic control right here in the Department of Transportation at the FAA.
I understand that these are private airlines, but you have regulatory power over them. Are you doing enough to compel these airlines to pay attention to this issue?
Yes, I think so. If you look at the delays, for example, that America experienced through last year in the summer 2022, a lot of that was driven by these companies not having the staff that they needed. I think they understand as a business that they can't let that happen again, especially because we're holding them accountable for making sure anything under their control, including adequate staffing, is where it needs to be.
What is DOT and FAA doing to hold these folks accountable? I point to this letter from the state's attorneys general. I believe there were 30 of them to you in December saying, while they commend you, you're not doing enough. Do you need to do more?
What we're doing is we are holding the airlines accountable for anything under their control. So we're not going to slap a fine on them because they got hit with bad weather. But if they're running a schedule that they can't service because they don't have the staff to do it, we're going to hold them accountable for that. We're investigating a number of airlines right now over their scheduling practices. And one of the biggest things that has changed compared to even just a year ago are the specific requirements that are enforceable on airlines for how they have to take care of passengers out of their pocket, not the passenger's pocket, when they leave passengers stranded because they weren't prepared. We got to make sure there are these kinds of economic incentives and a carrot and a stick to make sure that the airlines are doing the right thing and staffing to the schedules that they're actually selling.
Do you worry about safety? I've talked to some pilots who are saying this margin of safety, you know what I'm talking about, the margin of safety is getting closer. I know so far we haven't had accident in some 15, 16 years, but are we closing that margin of safety such that it worries you?
We never take for granted the exceptional safety record of U.S. aviation. If you just stop and think about it for a second, it is a marvel that a form of transportation that involves being propelled by flammable fuel through the sky, miles above the surface of the ground, at nearly the speed of sound, gets millions of passengers to where they're going safely and is actually safer than any other form of transportation. That's because we have extremely high standards, extremely tough regulations, and a high level of redundancy. And that's something that you can't ever treat as a destination, like, oh, it's safe now, we got there, we're all done. You got to keep pushing and keep adapting. And that's exactly exactly the approach that I've asked the FAA to take and that I think everybody in the aviation sector takes very seriously.
I was talking to a student, young student. She said, I wish I had more money from the federal government. If I went to college, I'd qualify for a Pell Grant. Does the government need to help pay scholarships, grants, whatever it is, help fund this? This is an expensive business that you get into. You know that. Does the government need to do more to attract these students by offering scholarships and grants?
Yeah, there's clearly a gap here. Now, again, I don't believe that taxpayers should pay for something that companies should be doing on their own. But I do think it's a fair question why you would get more subsidy or support if you're going out to be a dentist than if you're going out to be a pilot. And we're looking right now at what we might be able to do to true that up and to make sure that more people are supported who will have a great, good paying career.
One economist says this is going to be a problem, this shortage and possible delays, canceled routes for 5 to 10 years. It just takes too long to get these folks in the system. And I just want you to look in your crystal ball. What would you tell consumers? Are we looking at 5 to 10 years before this all shakes out?
There's definitely gaps and periods and places in the system are just uneven right now. So if you look at, for example, pilots, there are certain qualifications, certain planes, certain seats where it's pretty well covered and others where there's a gap. This is not something that's going to be worked out overnight. It took years to get this way. On the other hand, it's clear that some of the work we've done in the short term has paid off. So far this year, the rate of airline flight cancellation is hovering around 2%, which is at or below what we've seen generally over the last decade. What we've got to do is keep moving things in the right direction. And while nobody can control the weather, anything that's either under the control of airlines or under the control of the FAA needs to be worked on to really minimize those disruptions.
The last question I'll leave you with is, should you be telling airlines to stop making promises they can't keep? You mentioned it. They're promising some routes. They don't have enough staff to fly. Should you step in and say the airlines have to stop this?
Well, we're not just saying it, we're enforcing it. If an airline is knowingly flying an unrealistic schedule, there are going to be consequences. We have active investigations underway right now with regard to that. We take that very seriously because when you sell a ticket to a paying customer and you make a profit off of that, you better be ready to do everything in your power to service that ticket. And we're also going to hold you responsible for what happens if you can't. That's why these passenger protections that we got compared to a year ago, things that passengers should learn about at flightrights.gov so that you know before you buy a ticket what to expect. And if you're in that situation, you know what you can call on the airline to do. We're looking at a new era in terms of the empowerment of passengers because airlines have to handle anything that's under their control. We can't control the weather, but they can control a lot of other things, and we're going to hold them accountable for that.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your time. Hope to see you again soon. I'm sure we're going to be covering this into the years ahead. Hope to see you on the road.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Thanks.